Get into this video about King being stabbed in 1959 by Olaire, female. She stabbed him, almost assassinated him. 10 years before the assassination attempt. Let's go.
Or even attacked during their lifetime. Civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. would be subject to the latter when he was stabbed in 1958. While the attack wasn't as shocking, considering the hate King received at the time, death threats and bricks being thrown through his home, the attacker came to the surprise of many. Izola Curry was the woman responsible for the assault with intentions to kill the activist. It is common knowledge that it is reported that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968 by gun wound while staying at a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. But Izola Curry nearly 10 years earlier almost reversed the course of history forever. Many have questioned if her mental instability had to do with the crime, raising many more questions and creating theories on the topic for years to come. Through the stress and ups and downs Izola faced throughout the civil rights movement, struggling with her own personal issues, she's a prominent figure nonetheless, and her life as a whole is a story you should know. Izola Curry was born on June 14, 1916, in Adrian, Georgia, to a family of sharecroppers. The town was small and located roughly 100 miles from Savannah. As one of 8 children, money was scarce, and this led to Curry leaving school in the 7th grade in order to help support her family. Now, being so young and with very little experience outside of sharecropping as well, Curry would often find work as a housekeeper in order to contribute to her family. This would come after a move to New York City that saw the former housekeeper finding more work in her respective field. It was when work became scarce for Curry that issues began, as her hallucinations about the NAACP and Martin Luther King Jr. specifically began.
It's your project, and yours.
Curry would struggle looking for work, even taking trips back to Georgia to regroup before trying her luck in New York again multiple times over the years. On the eventful day that she would decide to attack Martin Luther King Jr., it was clear that Curry was prepared for a disaster and sure about MLK's involvement in actions against the country. It is possible that Curry was influenced by the rhetoric of J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. Hoover was sure that King was a communist and believed the message King was spreading was toxic and dangerous to America. On September 20th, 1958, Martin Luther King Jr. had made a trip to Harlem, New York for his book signing, for his book titled Stride Toward Freedom.
Let's just imagine if King was still alive. Would King be in that movement out there now, y'all, fighting for them illegal migrants? Y'all think so? Yeah, I do. Right? And we ain't getting nothing done on our behalf. So, a communist. Make you think and wonder, right? Jesse Jackson, Al Sharptons, and all them house niggas out there bumping shoulders with these illegal migrants. So you know King would have been out there bumping his shoulders with them too. Facts, not fiction.
Stop marked one of many during the tour to promote the book and took place at Bloomstein's department store. On the fateful day of the attack, Curry approached much like any other fan did that day, appearing as though she may have been getting an autograph. Now, according to the most accurate story from a collection of accounts, Curry asked King Jr. if he were indeed Martin Luther King Jr. Upon hearing yes, the 42-year-old would plunge a 7-inch letter opener into the chest of the activist, much to the horror of bystanders. Following the attack, police were quick to the scene, detaining Curry before beginning a series of questioning, uncovering just how deep her plan went. Information from the Philadelphia Tribune reveals the immediate reaction of Curry to the police impending arrest, stating, when questioned by police at New York's 28th Precinct, she accused civil rights leaders of boycotting and torturing her, as well as causing her to lose jobs and forcing her to change her religion. Curry also suggested that dangerous connections were being forged between the civil rights movement and the Communist Party. Medical records would prove that Curry's mental health issues were extensive, and it is more likely that her outbursts and thoughts that went against reality made it nearly impossible for her to maintain employment. The questioning made the police weary of her mental state, as she yelled and slurred her words at times. After being formally charged, Curry responded saying that she would be charging Martin Luther King Jr. with being a communist, and she was convinced that he was a spy that had been assisting the other side. Another theory that was making Curry suspicious was that King Jr. had tortured her and purposely keeping her from her able to keep a job. Now Curry also had a pistol in her bra. She claimed to have bought a gun a year prior for $26, and despite having it on her at the time of the attack, mentioned she did not intend to shoot King. This weapon was to handle members of his team in the event that they retaliated once she had attacked. According to the When Harlem Saved a King documentary, after subsequently being found in such a state of insanity that she could not understand the attempted murder charge lodged against her, and as a result was incapable of aiding her defense. Curry was committed to the Matawan State Hospital for the criminally insane in upstate Fishkill, New York. With the stature of Martin Luther King Jr. as a preacher from the South, who had already been instrumental in actually helping black people on a national scale by the Montgomery bus boycott, the public was even more confused by the actions of Curry. After the commitment to the state hospital, the whereabouts of Curry would become relatively unknown as she essentially disappeared for the press for the next 40 years.
Was she an
as
agent?
She would go to another mental health hospital before.
Was she an agent? Who hired her, y'all? That's the question. Who hired her? Because if they had it out for King, understand me? They had it out for King. And then 10 years later, he get assassinated. Who put a battery in her back? That's the question.
Her eventual nursing home stay in Queens, New York. The official diagnosis from the psychiatrist was schizophrenia. For Curry, this was notable as the news covered the event widely beginning in November, just 2 months after the nearly history-changing assassination that King would famously reference just a day before his actual untimely assassination in 1968. The documentary highlights the reference from the "I've been to the mountaintop" speech, saying, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. King told the Mason Temple audience, before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to the Harlem hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon.
Benjamin
that blade had gone
Franklin
through
was
when
a
X-rays
Mason.
revealed
George Washington
that the
was
tip
a
of
Mason.
the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And
Slave
once that's
holders.
punctured, you drown in your own blood. That's the end of you. The crowd looked on in shock by the details, with some looking sad, remembering the fateful day when they heard of the news of King's stabbing. Now, despite the incident, Martin Luther King Jr. would sternly assert that he had no animosity or anger towards the woman, as he understood her mental state and was just happy to be alive, as a New York Times article published that day after his death would reveal that if he had sneezed, he would have died with a letter opener that had pierced his sternum. During the years from the incident, many attempted to retrieve the records of Curry to discover her whereabouts since the incident, but to no avail. It was eventually a voter registration in Queens, New York prior to the 2012 election that sparked the location of Curry for the press and others to gain more information on what she had been up to for all these years. After the initial commitment to Matawan, Curry would spend only 14 years there before a leg injury saw her transferred to the nursing home. In her final years, the narrative surrounding Izola Curry changed greatly through those that were with her day to day in the nursing home. People remembered her often smiling and being willing to talk to nearly anyone. Now, very frail and short in stature, Curry is a shell of the woman who was nearly an assassin over 50 years ago. The New York Times had been a publication keeping track on her life once she was found in 2012, with an article revealing that the Smoking Gun wrote of having found Miss Curry, physically and mentally feeble, at the nursing home, Hillside Manor, in the Jamaica section of Queens. While Curry described her daily routine, up at 5:30 a.m., bed around 10 p.m., and not much going in between, the profile said she met questions about King and the stabbing with a furrowed brow and a blank stare. It cannot be confirmed that Izola Curry did or did not understand the questioning, but it was clear that she was withering away and in the final years of her life of fighting mental health issues. With no family to survive her, as she claimed they had all passed or that she lost contact with them, Izola Curry leaves nothing more behind than a legacy of what if, a peek into the way that mental health and job opportunities have been treated in the United States over time. Izola Curry would pass away on March 7th of 2015 alone, having outlived most of her peers. While the services of the nursing home helped greatly to keep her safe and under control for decades, one can never forget the story you should know surrounding her legendary assassination attempt against the great man, Martin Luther King Jr.
You saying Martin Luther King's mother was assassinated? Huh? That's what they saying? That's Martin Luther King's mother. That's his wife. Guess his father. Let's get into this story here, y'all. They said Martin Luther King's mother was assassinated. Let's see.
Legacy and the King dynasty. She was undoubtedly one of the most influential women of the 20th century. She reigned and was quite powerful during the 1920s through the early 1970s, a time in history before the internet, before cell phones, but still a time where a mother calls for justice. Yet, her calls went unanswered.
Today we'll shine light on the tragic case of Alberta Christine Williams King.
Alberta.
Atlanta, Georgia, often called the cradle of the civil rights movement, a city where tradition met change and where the fight for justice carved its path in history. By the 1970s, Atlanta stood at a crossroads, embodying both progress and pain. New growth brought opportunities and promise, yet the scars of segregation and inequality still cut deep, leaving many black communities trapped in the shadows of poverty. Yet
To this
still,
day, goddamn.
Atlanta thrived as a center of black excellence.
So as we watch this video, what has changed since then to now? God damn it. We in a worse goddamn predicament than this. History here, y'all. Pay attention.
Its politics, culture, education, and music inspired generations. A city where possibility and resilience lived side by side with struggle. Atlanta was a place where leaders emerged, where churches stood as anchors of strength and symbols of faith. From the pulpits of Atlanta, words of hope traveled the nation, and hymns of freedom became the soundtrack of a movement. Alberta Christine Williams was born on September 13, 1903 in Atlanta, Georgia, the only child of Reverend Adam Daniel Williams and Jenny Celeste Park Williams. Her father was the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a cornerstone of the Sweet Auburn community, located at 407 Auburn Avenue, a street once held by Fortune magazine as the richest Negro street in America. Growing up as the pastor's daughter, Alberta's life was deeply shaped by the church, grounded in faith and dedicated to community service. She carried those Christian values with her into every part of her life. In 1920, Alberta met a young minister named Michael King, and the two would begin dating. Both were committed to continuing their education, and by 1924, Alberta earned her teaching certificate from Hampton Normal and Industrial Institute, known today as Hampton University, before beginning her career as a teacher in Atlanta's local schools. On November 25, 1926, Alberta Williams married Michael King at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Since the local school board prohibited married women from teaching, Alberta was forced to give up her career. The young couple settled on the second floor of her parents' home, where they began raising their family. Their first child, Willie Christine King, was born in 1927, followed by Michael King Jr. in 1929 and Alfred Daniel King in 1930. After Alberta's father, Reverend Adam Daniel Williams, passed away in 1931, her husband, Reverend Michael King Sr., stepped into his role as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Alberta, meanwhile, shaped the church in her own way. In 1932, she founded and directed the Ebenezer Choir, while also continuing her education at Morris Brown College. Just a few years later, during a trip to Germany in 1934, Michael King Sr. was deeply moved by the story and teachings of Martin Luther, a German priest and the Protestant reformer.
That's who Martin Luther King named after, y'all. This dude right here. Yeah.
When he returned to Atlanta, he changed both his own name and that of his eldest son, who was 5 years old at the time, to Martin Luther King Sr. and Martin Luther King Jr. With active roles in civic and religious organizations, Alberta's work also extended beyond the church.
Mrs. King was an active member of the NAACP. She was involved with the Young Women's Christian Association and the Women's International League for Peace. Alberta Bunch King served as the organist for Ebenezer Church from 1932 until 1972.
She understood the importance of a beautiful home, a beautiful life, a supportive wife, but she never allowed that to prevent all of the desires of her heart. She was a well-rounded, fully rounded lady.
And in 1938, she earned her bachelor's degree. But above all, Alberta devoted herself to motherhood. She raised her children to value education, to face discrimination with dignity, and to never see themselves as inferior. Through love, faith, and resilience, Alberta laid the foundation for the legacy her family would carry into the world. Alberta was often described as soft-spoken, reserved, and someone who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Yet during the 1950s and 1960s, as the civil rights movement played a steady role in supporting her son, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She helped organize rallies and stood faithfully behind him as his leadership and influence grew. She helped organize rallies and stood faithfully behind him as his leadership and influence grew.
She always said to me, you must never feel that you are less than anybody else. You must always feel that you are somebody, and you must feel that you are as good as anybody else. And of course, this came up with me in spite of the fact that I still confronted the system of segregation every day.
Is that a violent conflict in your life? If you really believed your mother, and yet the system around you suggested that this wasn't true, it must have set up some sort of strain.
Yes, I think so. As I look back over those early days, I did have something of an inattention. On the one hand, my mother taught me that I should feel a sense of somebodyness. On the other hand, I had to go out and face the system, which stared me in the face every day saying, you are less than, you are not equal to. So this was a real tension within.
Reflecting on her presence in his life, Dr. King once wrote, my mother, Alberta Williams King, was behind the scenes setting forth those motherly cares, the lack of which leaves a missing link in life. During this era, Dr. King also shared the pulpit with his father, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., and his brother, Reverend Alfred Daniel King, as co-pastors of Ebenezer Baptist Church, while Alberta continued her own service as choir director. But in 1968, tragedy struck. On April 4th, civil rights leader and minister Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had gone to lead a march in support of the sanitation workers. He was just 39 years old. Alberta, though extremely devastated, became a source of strength for her family in the wake of her son's assassination. Yet heartbreak would strike again the following year on July 21st when her youngest son, civil rights activist and minister Alfred Daniel King, suspiciously drowned in his own pool. He was just 38 years old. For Alberta, the loss of both sons were unbearable, but still, with unwavering strength and faith, and as the King family's matriarch, she continued to carry the weight of her family's legacy. On Sunday morning, June 30th, 1974, nearly 400 worshipers gathered at Ebenezer Baptist Church for what began as a typical service. Amongst them was a young black man in a tan suit, who many assumed was simply a visitor. At around 11 a.m., as the service began, Alberta King sat at the organ playing the Lord's Prayer, when suddenly chaos erupted. The young man, later identified as 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault, leaped to his feet shouting, "You must stop this. You are serving a false god." From the balcony, the chief usher of the church recalled hearing the commotion and seeing Marcus leap from the amen corner into the pulpit, brandishing 2 pistols. As panic filled the church, what followed was a nightmare. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus opened fire. Bullets ripped through the air until both weapons were empty. Witnesses remembered him yelling, "I'm taking over this morning, and I'm going to kill everyone in here." When Marcus attempted to reload, Alberta's grandson Derek and other brave members of the congregation rushed forward and restrained him, bringing the rampage to an end. In the aftermath of the gunfire, members of the congregation looked around. Several people were injured, and next to the organ was Alberta lying on the floor, clutching her face. During the violent attack, Alberta, church deacon Edward Borkin, church members Jimmy Mitchell, and others had been struck by bullets and were rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital. Edward Barkin, 69 years old, was pronounced deceased on arrival. Church member Jimmy Mitchell was shot in the neck. However, she survived her injuries.
Because I tried to get on the seat myself, but I knew he had already shot me. But I thought he shot me once, and he was right there by me. He might shoot me again, so I was trying to get under the seat to keep from getting killed.
Alberta was gravely wounded by a gunshot to the right side of her face. She was described as barely alive when she reached the hospital. Moments later, Alberta Williams King would succumb to her injuries. She was 70 years old. The loss was unimaginable. 6 years after the assassination of her eldest son, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and only 5 years after the sudden passing of her youngest son, Reverend Alfred Daniel King, Alberta Christine Williams King was taken by violence. Reflecting on that day, her daughter Christine King Ferris wrote in her 2009 memoir titled "Through It All," "That Sunday was without question the worst day of my life. I thought I had made it through the worst days of my life. I was wrong." 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault, who was subdued by members of the congregation, was arrested immediately for the shooting.
Some nights I want a great...
Was arrested immediately for the shooting. Marcus Wayne Chenault was born June 30th, 1951 in Winchester, Kentucky. His parents, Marcus and Henderly Chenault, were devout Baptists who regularly attended church, and for much of his youth, Marcus appeared to have lived a relatively normal life. The family later moved to Ohio, where he attended college for a time before dropping out. In 1973, Marcus encountered Hananiah Israel, born Stephen Holloman, a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher and black Hebrew Israelite preacher. Holloman rejected the New Testament denounced black civil rights leaders, and cast mainstream black ministers as corrupt and deceptive. Now considering Holloman his mentor, Marcus embraced these radical teachings and soon became consumed by hatred for Christianity. Desperate for recognition and acceptance, he compiled a list of prominent black ministers and civil rights figures as potential targets. Just 2 weeks before the shooting, Marcus intended to assassinate Reverend Jesse Jackson in Chicago, but he abandoned the plan at the last minute for reasons unknown. On June 29, 1974, he boarded a bus bound for Atlanta, carrying 2 pistols stolen from his father. The next morning, June 30th, on his birthday, he walked into Ebenezer Baptist Church. His original target, he later admitted, had been Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., but when he saw Alberta at the organ, he decided to shoot her instead because she was the nearest to him. Marcus would go on to say his actions was because he believed black ministers were a menace to black people. Although his attorneys pleaded insanity, the court ruled him to be competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists testified that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, yet on September 12, 1974, the jury found him guilty of first-degree unaliving. When Martin Luther King Sr. asked him directly why he unalived his wife, Marcus replied, "Because she was a Christian, and all Christians are my enemies." He was sentenced to be unalived by the electric chair, but the King family, firm in their opposition to capital punishment, advocated against his execution. In 1995, a judge commuted his sentence to life in prison. Only months later, on August 3rd, Marcus suffered a stroke. And on August 19, 1995, Marcus Wayne Chenault passed away at the age of 44. In 1980, the home of Alberta Christine and Martin Luther King Sr. was designated for preservation as part of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park. Community programs and memorial events at the national park titled Mother's Day Letter Writing, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters to his mother, highlighting her enduring influence. A dedicated scholarship at Spelman College that support music majors is named in Alberta's memory. Martin Luther King Sr. passed away on November 11, 1984, at the age of 84. Willie Christine King Ferris passed away on June 29, 2023, at the age of 95. Alberta Williams King was one of those voices, steady, faithful, and unwavering. Her story reminds us that true legacies are not built on fame, but on love, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Though her name is not often spoken, without her, the story of the King family could never be told. To those who knew her, she was described as the hidden force behind her crusading sons and husband, and rightly so. Much like a gem, her strength was often unseen, but her value was beyond measure. Though her life ended in tragedy, her legacy continues to shine. So to Alberta Christine Williams King, and to so many women like her, thank you. No story is forgotten, no voice should go unheard. Rest in peace to Miss Alberta, Reverend Martin Sr., Miss Christine, Dr. Martin Jr., and Reverend Alfred King. Sending my deepest condolences and prayers to the family and friends.